He arrived at the office with his usual routine, carrying a cup of coffee in one hand and a bag slung over his shoulder. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the rows of desks. Everything seemed normal, calm even, which he appreciated. He liked calm. His desk was neat, organized in a way that allowed him to find everything without even thinking. His computer booted up, emails loaded, and he began his work with focused determination. But just as he started typing, a sudden burst of laughter erupted from across the office. He glanced up, sighing quietly. It was her. She leaned over the cubicle wall, grinning in a way that seemed designed specifically to distract him. He tried to ignore it, telling himself he had important work to do. Yet, within seconds, she had knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. They fluttered everywhere like startled birds. He looked up, trying to mask his irritation, but she only smiled wider. She had that effect like a mischievous force that refused to be contained. Every day felt like this. Every day, without fail, she would find a way to break his focus. Sometimes it was a joke, sometimes it was a prank. Sometimes it was simply her energy filling the room until he could no longer concentrate. He took a deep breath, bent down to pick up the papers, and felt a strange mix of frustration and amusement. He hated how easily she could get to him, how she could make him lose his cool with just a glance or a simple word. He told himself he was too old for this kind of thing. But every time she smiled, that thought evaporated. The office was alive with the usual morning buzz. Phones rang, printers whirred, colleagues exchanged greetings and small talk. But amidst all this, her presence felt like a current that flowed straight to him. Tugging at his patience, and oddly at his curiosity, he returned to his computer, fingers poised over the keyboard, only to find a sticky note suddenly slapped onto his monitor. It read, "Guess who's planning your surprise today?" In bright, cheerful handwriting, he groaned, removing the note. He knew this was only the beginning. The day stretched ahead like a long road, and he could already sense the bumps she would place along the way. The clock ticked slowly, each minute a reminder that she would inevitably cross paths with him in some way. As the morning progressed, he tried to immerse himself in work. Reports, spreadsheets, emails, all the things he could control. But no matter how deeply he focused, she found moments to intrude. A cup of pens mysteriously tipped over, scattering across the floor. A phone call with an important client interrupted by a sudden, loud joke from her desk. He felt his composure slipping, subtle mix of annoyance and reluctant laughter bubbling up. Lunch arrived, a brief reprieve. He carried his meal to a quiet corner, hoping to eat in peace. Yet even there she appeared, holding a sandwich and a grin. She sat a few seats away, making exaggerated chewing noises and telling an ongoing story about her morning. He pretended not to listen, but snippets of her story made him smile despite himself. Her laughter was infectious, though he would never admit it aloud. Back at his desk, the afternoon offered no relief. She found new ways to disturb him. Sometimes it was a misplaced item. Other times it was a cleverly timed comment that made him blink in surprise or roll his eyes in exasperation. He started to notice the pattern. She seemed to know exactly when he was most focused, most serious. And that was when she would strike. He remembered the first day she arrived at the office. She had been introduced with polite smiles and small talk, a newcomer meant to join the team. He had thought she was overly energetic at first, perhaps even a bit too loud for his taste. But over time, he realized that her energy wasn't just noise. It was a force that could shift moods, lighten tension, and make people pay attention to the present moment. He just happened to be the one she chose to test the most. His colleagues often whispered about their dynamic. Some found it amusing, others slightly dramatic. But he knew that underneath the surface, there was something about her that demanded notice. She didn't just interrupt the day. She reshaped it. Even the most mundane tasks became unpredictable, and part of him resented how he had begun to anticipate her next move. How he had started to think about her, even when he tried not to. The afternoon dragged, and with each passing hour, he felt the tension building. He found himself glancing at her desk, trying to predict what she might do next. She noticed these glances, and he could swear she smirked knowingly. It was a battle of wills, though he had no idea why he allowed it to continue. Maybe it was the thrill of unpredictability. Or maybe it was the subtle way she had inserted herself into his life without permission. At one point, a small spill of coffee sent him scrambling with paper towels, and she appeared as if on cue, holding her own cup innocently. She offered a sarcastic, sympathetic sigh and a hand to help, though he barely needed it. Her eyes twinkled, and he felt the familiar stir of emotions he didn't want to acknowledge. He wanted to be annoyed, to be angry, but there was a strange warmth in that moment. A recognition that he wasn't entirely miserable despite himself. By late afternoon, he was exhausted in a way that wasn't entirely physical. The constant interruptions, the teasing, the unexpected laughter, it all took a toll. Yet beneath that exhaustion was a flicker of something else, anticipation. He caught himself wondering what she might do next, how she would challenge him tomorrow, and whether he might secretly look forward to it. He chastised himself for thinking that, for even a fleeting moment. The office slowly began to empty as the day came to a close. People said their goodbyes, packed their bags, and left for home. He sat for a moment, staring at the quieted space, and let out a long breath. For all the chaos she had caused, he realized that the day had felt alive. The dull hum of routine had been broken, and he couldn't deny that a part of him had enjoyed it. Even when he was furious, as he packed up his own things, he noticed the little traces she left behind. A sticky note with a small doodle, a pen slightly out of place on his desk, a half-eaten snack she had forgotten. Each tiny detail reminded him that she had been there, present, unavoidable. He couldn't escape it, and he found himself thinking that maybe he didn't want to. Stepping out of the office, he felt the cool evening air on his face. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. He walked to his car, thinking about the day and the unpredictable moments she had created. He knew that tomorrow would be similar, another round of playful chaos and subtle challenges. He knew he would brace himself, but he also knew he might secretly look forward to it, even if he would never admit it. Driving home, he replayed scenes from the day in his mind, her laughter echoing down the hallway. The prank with the papers, the mischievous glint in her eyes. He realized that while he had spent the entire day trying to maintain control, she had effortlessly controlled his attention, his emotions, his reactions. It was exhausting, frustrating, oddly exhilarating all at once. By the time he reached his apartment, he was mentally tired, but emotionally alive. He sat down on his couch, reflecting on how someone could have such an effect on his routine, his focus, his peace. He thought about the small ways she had inserted herself into his life and realized that for all the frustration, there was a part of him that appreciated her presence. He wasn't sure why, and he wasn't ready to admit it to anyone, least of all himself, but he couldn't deny the truth as he prepared for bed. He found himself replaying the day again, smiling despite himself. He remembered the way her laughter had felt contagious, the way her energy had brightened the dull office space, the little surprises that had punctuated his day. He realized that tomorrow would bring more of the same, and part of him felt a flicker of anticipation for it. He tried to push the thought away, telling himself he needed rest and focus, but sleep came slowly, tangled with memories of the day and the undeniable awareness that she had made an impression he couldn't ignore, and so the day ended, leaving him with a mixture of exhaustion, irritation, amusement, and a strange, unspoken curiosity. He didn't know what the future held, or why someone could have such a profound effect on his ordinary life. But he knew that this was only the beginning of something unpredictable. Something that might just change his days, his moods, and perhaps even his heart in ways he wasn't ready to understand yet. The next morning started like any other. He arrived early, hoping for a calm start before the office filled with the usual chatter. He placed his bag on the hook, poured himself a cup of coffee, and settled at his desk. The quiet felt like a small gift. A brief window to get organized and focus before the inevitable distractions arrived. He opened his emails, glanced at the schedule for the day, and prepared for meetings. Everything seemed normal. He was determined not to let the previous day's interruptions get to him. He told himself he would maintain focus, that he wouldn't be pulled into any unexpected chaos. Today would be different, he thought. Today he would be in control. Then, without warning, she appeared, leaning casually against the edge of his cubicle. She held a folder under one arm and smiled in a way that made it clear she knew she was about to disrupt his morning. He tried not to react, hoping that ignoring her would be enough to prevent any mischief. But she only chuckled softly, as if anticipating his futile attempts to stay focused. She leaned closer, pretending to examine his desk. But her fingers were clearly in the wrong place, nudging his neatly arranged pens and stapler. Papers slid dangerously close to the edge, and he reached out to catch them, but not before a few scattered onto the floor. He sighed, picking them up, while she gave an exaggerated, innocent shrug. The expression on her face made it impossible for him to stay truly annoyed. She had a way of turning any moment into something both irritating and strangely charming. Throughout the morning, she found one little way after another to catch his attention. Sometimes it was a whisper meant only for him, a comment about a meeting or a joke she had invented on the spot. Other times, it was a more obvious prank, like hiding a document he needed or placing a small object in an unexpected location. He became aware that no matter how serious he tried to be, she always had a way to pull him out of his focus. The more he tried to concentrate, the more aware he became of her presence. He noticed the subtle things, the way her hair caught the light, the way her laughter echoed down the hallway, the tiny quirks that made her movements unpredictable. Even when she wasn't directly interacting with him, he found himself watching, listening, waiting for the next interruption. He felt a strange mix of frustration and curiosity, as if a puzzle had been placed before him that he couldn't help but try to solve. His colleagues noticed the growing tension between them. Some whispered quietly, amused by the dynamic, while others offered subtle advice. One coworker mentioned that he seemed unusually tense and suggested he might lighten up. But he dismissed it, insisting that he was simply focused. Deep down, however, he wondered why he felt so drawn to someone who seemed intent on disrupting his peace. Lunchtime offered a temporary escape. He carried his meal to a quiet corner, hoping to eat without interruption. For a while it worked. He enjoyed the moment of solitude, appreciating the calm and the ability to gather his thoughts. But even there, she managed to find him. She appeared at the edge of the cafeteria, chatting with someone nearby, and her laughter carried across the room. He caught a glimpse of her looking in his direction, smiling knowingly. She hadn't even come to his table yet. He felt her presence, a subtle reminder that she could reach him anywhere. Back at his desk after lunch, he prepared for a meeting. He reviewed documents carefully, ensuring he was ready to present his points with clarity. Yet, as he organized his notes, he noticed a small piece of paper tucked into his folder. It read simply, "Don't forget to smile today." He couldn't recall when it had been placed there. For a moment he felt a flicker of warmth, quickly buried under his usual focus. It was hard to admit, even to himself, that small gestures like this mattered. The afternoon stretched on, bringing with it more opportunities for distraction. She seemed to have an uncanny sense of timing, appearing exactly when he was most absorbed in a task. She asked questions that were just tricky enough to make him pause, or made a comment that caused him to glance up and lose his train of thought. Despite his determination to remain focused, he began to notice that he was laughing more than he had intended, a small but undeniable concession to her influence. He remembered the first weeks of working together, how he had approached every interaction with her cautiously. She was new then, and her energy had felt overwhelming, even unsettling. But over time he had begun to see patterns, nuances in her behavior that made her less chaotic and more intentional. Her disruptions weren't random. They were designed to provoke, to elicit a reaction, to draw attention. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, he found himself responding. Sometimes with irritation, sometimes with amusement, and occasionally with a begrudging appreciation. During one particularly busy moment, a technical issue arose. A report he had been working on failed to print, and he found himself scrambling to resolve the problem. She appeared at just the right moment, offering a suggestion in a casual, almost nonchalant tone. He followed her advice, resolving the issue quickly. He felt a flash of surprise, realizing that her playful presence could also be unexpectedly helpful. She wasn't just a source of chaos. She could be an ally if he allowed it. As the day wore on, he became increasingly aware of how much attention he paid to her. Every movement, every word, every glance seemed to register with him, even when he tried to ignore it. He felt a strange tension building inside, a combination of frustration, curiosity, and something he could not yet name. She had a way of getting under his skin while simultaneously drawing him in, creating a dynamic that was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. By late afternoon, the office had quieted, but she remained a persistent presence. She wandered the aisles, talking to colleagues, occasionally glancing in his direction. He found himself aware of her proximity, noticing the small gestures and expressions that others might overlook. The way she tilted her head when she laughed, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The subtle energy she brought into every space she entered, all of it made him both anxious and attentive, a combination that left him on edge in a way he didn't fully understand. As the workday drew to a close, reflected on the events of the day. He had accomplished his tasks, resolved problems, and maintained a professional demeanor, yet he felt an unusual sense of fatigue. It wasn't the usual exhaustion from work. It was the result of constant engagement, of navigating the unpredictable presence of someone who seemed determined to draw him out of his routines. And yet, despite the tiredness, there was a subtle satisfaction, a sense that the day had been alive in a way he rarely experienced. Packing his things, he noticed the small signs she had left behind. A pen slightly out of place on his desk, a note he hadn't seen until now, a minor adjustment to an item on his computer. Each detail reminded him that she had been there, shaping the day in small but undeniable ways. He felt a mixture of irritation and appreciation, unable to fully separate the two. She had driven him crazy, yes, but she had also made the day memorable, vibrant, and strangely enjoyable walking to his car. He thought about how unpredictable interactions had become a part of his daily life. The constant interplay between focus and distraction, irritation and amusement had created a rhythm that he couldn't ignore. He realized that while he had resisted her influence, he had also begun to look forward to the unpredictability she brought. The thought unsettled him, though he refused to admit it aloud. It was easier to frame it as annoyance, as frustration, rather than curiosity or intrigue. As he drove home, sky painted with evening hues, he replayed moments from the day. He remembered the small jokes, the pranks, the gestures that had broken the monotony of work. He acknowledged, even if only internally, that these moments had affected him more than he expected. The way she had inserted herself into his day, to his thoughts, had left a mark, subtle yet undeniable. By the time he arrived home, he was mentally drained, but emotionally stirred. He prepared a simple dinner, trying to focus on the routine of cooking, yet his mind wandered back to the office. He thought about her laughter, her mischievous smile, the way she seemed to know exactly when and how to appear. He realized that the day's events had forced him to engage in ways he hadn't anticipated, and in doing so, he had learned something about his own patience, curiosity, and capacity for unexpected amusement. Sitting down to eat, he reflected on the growing complexity of his feelings. She had started as an annoyance, a disruption, a force to be resisted. But over time, her presence had become a source of intrigue, of subtle connection, of emotional engagement he couldn't easily define. He felt a mixture of frustration, admiration, and an unfamiliar anticipation for what might come next. The thought was both exciting and unsettling. Tension he had not experienced before as the night settled in. Prepared for bed, replaying the day in his mind one last time. He recognized the patterns, the ways she had subtly influenced him. And he felt a quiet acknowledgement of the impact she had on his life. It wasn't merely a distraction. It was engagement, a reminder that even in routine and structure, life could be unpredictable, lively, and profoundly human. And though he wouldn't admit it to anyone, even himself, he knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more interruptions, and more moments that he would find himself unable to ignore. The morning air felt different that day, softer somehow, as if the world had taken a small pause. He arrived at the office with his usual cup of coffee in hand, walking through the familiar corridor. His desk was neat, just the way he liked it, but he had a faint sense that today might not follow the usual rhythm. There was a subtle tension in the air, feeling that something might change. She appeared almost immediately, leaning casually against the edge of his cubicle with that playful glint in her eyes. She didn't even need to say anything. Her presence alone was enough to make him tense. He felt that familiar mix of annoyance and curiosity, a feeling he had started to recognize as part of the pattern between them. Today, he resolved he would maintain his focus. Today, he would not let her antics derail him. For a while, it seemed like he might succeed. He worked diligently on a report, his mind absorbed in numbers and charts, his hands moving quickly over the keyboard. But he could feel her watching, a subtle energy that seemed to hum through the office. He glanced up briefly and caught her smirk. It was the kind of smile that meant mischief was imminent. And he immediately braced himself for what might come next. She didn't disappoint. First, it was a gentle nudge of his chair when he wasn't looking, a small prank that made him jump slightly. Then, she left a small sticky note on his monitor that read, "Are you smiling yet?" In bright letters. He sighed, removing it quickly, but he couldn't deny that a small, reluctant grin had formed. Despite himself, he was affected by her presence. The morning passed in a blur of small interruptions and subtle engagements. Sometimes she would ask him a question that seemed simple, but upon answering, he would realize that she had caught him off guard, making him think in ways he hadn't anticipated. Other times, she would leave little surprises on his desk-an unusual pen. A tiny doodle, a folded piece of paper with a short, witty note. Each gesture was small, but cumulative, leaving him both frustrated and intrigued. He noticed that his colleagues were observing the dynamic with quiet amusement. Some whispered among themselves, pointing out the ways she seemed to get under his skin, and others tried to offer advice on how to respond. But he had no clear strategy. Every day, her actions forced him to engage, to react, to notice. It was exhausting, yes, but there was something about it that made the day feel alive. During lunch, he found himself thinking about her more than he wanted to admit. He carried his meal to a quiet spot, hoping to eat without distraction. But memories of the morning's interactions kept replaying in his mind. He remembered the way she had leaned over the cubicle wall, the smirk on her face, the way she had moved a stack of papers just enough to make him react. He couldn't stop thinking about how effortlessly she had influenced his day, and he realized that part of him was beginning to look forward to these moments. The afternoon brought more of the same. But he began to notice subtle changes. She seemed to be paying attention to him in new ways, watching for reactions that were more complex than simple irritation. Sometimes she would offer genuine help, suggesting a solution to a problem he had been struggling with. Other times she would engage in a conversation that required more thought, prompting him to consider perspectives he hadn't before. It was as if she was trying to reach him on a different level, beyond the playful chaos that defined their interaction so far. He remembered how things had been in the first weeks after she joined the office. Her energy had felt overwhelming at first, even chaotic. But over time, he had started to recognize patterns, subtle cues that revealed a depth beneath the surface. She wasn't just a source of distraction. She was observant, intuitive, and capable of engaging with him in ways that mattered. Today, he realized, she was demonstrating that side of herself more clearly. A technical issue arose in the afternoon, and he found himself stuck, unsure of how to resolve it quickly. She appeared without warning, offering a suggestion in a calm, confident tone. Following her advice, he managed to fix the problem faster than expected. He felt a spark of surprise and appreciation. She had been a source of chaos all morning, yet here she was, capable and helpful. It was a contradiction he couldn't quite reconcile. But he had to admit it made her presence more intriguing. Throughout the day, he became increasingly aware of the subtle tension between them. There was a push and pull, a rhythm to their interactions that kept him on edge. He noticed the way she moved, the way she spoke, the small gestures that seemed almost calculated to get a response. And yet, There were moments of genuine connection, brief, fleeting moments where the teasing faded, leaving a sense of understanding, of mutual awareness. He found himself craving those moments, even as he resisted acknowledging it. As the workday drew on, the office began to quiet. People packed up their belongings and left, but she lingered, moving through the space with a casual grace. He watched her, realizing how much attention he paid to her movements, how aware he had become of her presence. It wasn't just her energy that affected him. It was the way she could shift the mood of the entire room, turning mundane tasks into something alive and unpredictable. He found himself thinking back to previous days, recalling the small pranks, the notes, the jokes, and the moments when she had offered help or insight. He realized that their interactions had begun to affect him outside of work as well. He thought about her during his commute, wondered what she might do next, and found that he missed the little chaos she brought when he didn't see her. It was an unexpected development, one that left him both unsettled and fascinated. Packing his things at the end of the day, he noticed small traces she had left behind, an object slightly out of place, a note tucked into his folder, a pen on his desk that he didn't remember having. Each detail reminded him that she had been there, shaping the day in ways he hadn't fully appreciated before. He felt a mixture of irritation, curiosity, and an unspoken respect. She had made an impact, subtle but undeniable. Walking to his car, he reflected on how much the day had affected him. The constant engagement, the unpredictable interruptions, the moments of insight and connection, it had all left him mentally tired but emotionally alert. He realized that he had begun to notice things about her that went beyond the playful chaos, the way she approached problems, the subtle expressions on her face, the genuine care she occasionally revealed. He couldn't ignore the effect she had on him, no matter how hard he tried. Driving home, he replayed the day's events in his mind. He thought about her smile, the way she had teased him, the moments when she had helped, and the subtle cues that suggested she was aware of the impact she had on him. He felt a strange mix of admiration, frustration, and anticipation, a combination that left him restless and thoughtful. He knew that the dynamic between them was shifting, evolving into something more complex and engaging than before. By the time he reached his apartment, he was mentally exhausted but emotionally stimulated. He made a simple dinner, trying to focus on the routine, yet he found his thoughts drifting back to the office, to her, to the moments that had left him unsettled and intrigued. He realized that her presence had begun to occupy his mind in ways he couldn't control, creating a tension between his desire for calm and his curiosity about her. Sitting down to eat, he reflected on the changes he had noticed in himself. He had gone from frustration to begrudging amusement, from irritation to awareness, and now to a subtle longing for interaction. He recognized that he was beginning to see her differently, appreciating qualities that had previously been obscured by annoyance. The realization was both unsettling and exciting, a reminder that human connections could be unpredictable and transformative. As night settled in, prepared for bed, replaying the day one final time, he thought about the patterns, the surprises, the moments of connection, and the subtle ways she had influenced his thoughts and emotions. He understood that their dynamic was no longer simply about distraction and chaos. It was becoming a more meaningful interplay, one that challenged him, engaged him, and left him contemplating possibilities he hadn't considered before. Lying in bed, he acknowledged silently that he was curious about what tomorrow might bring. The unpredictability, the teasing, the moments of insight, he was beginning to see them as a part of life that he had been missing. And though he resisted the idea, he couldn't deny that he was starting to care, to notice, and to anticipate in ways that made him feel both nervous and alive that morning. He arrived at the office with a sense of cautious anticipation. He had begun to notice how unpredictable her behavior could influence his mood, and he was curious about how the day might unfold. As usual, he set down his bag, poured a cup of coffee, and settled into the rhythm of his desk. The calm before the storm felt familiar, almost like the pause in a deep breath before a sudden movement. She appeared not long after, leaning casually near his cubicle with a soft grin. He tried to ignore her, focusing on the reports open on his screen, but the energy in the room seemed to shift as soon as she moved. He could feel the tension build, a mixture of anticipation and irritation. She didn't speak at first, simply observed him with that mischievous look that had become all too familiar. He clenched his jaw slightly, determined not to let her distract him. For the first part of the morning, he managed to keep his focus. He typed, clicked, and reviewed, trying to maintain a sense of control over his day. Yet, she found subtle ways to intrude. A pen rolled across his desk, a note appeared with a playful message, and when he looked up, she would be leaning slightly, pretending to examine a document that wasn't there. He felt his irritation rise, but mixed with it was a strange sense of amusement. Despite himself, he couldn't help noticing her, couldn't help reacting. By mid-morning, the usual chaos had escalated. She had orchestrated small distractions around him. Something fell near his desk. A chair was slightly moved. A whisper of a joke floated to him from another cubicle. Each incident required attention. Each one chipped away at his calm. He realized that no matter how prepared he was, she had a way of entering his world, shifting the focus, bending his routine just enough to make him pause. It frustrated him, yet he couldn't deny it was also compelling. He noticed, more clearly than before, the way she paid attention to him. She wasn't just causing interruptions for her amusement. There were moments where her actions seemed almost calculated to get him to look up, to engage, to react. The thought unsettled him. It was one thing to be disrupted by random energy, but another entirely to feel targeted in subtle ways. He couldn't figure out if she was aware of the effect she had on him, or if it was a natural outcome of her playful nature. During lunch, he tried to find a quiet spot to gather his thoughts. He sat alone, observing the office around him. People were chatting, laughing, sharing stories, yet his attention kept drifting to her. He thought about the morning, the small gestures, the distractions, and the moments of insight. He realized that she had become an unavoidable presence in his thoughts, even when she wasn't physically near. It was exhausting but strangely engaging. Returning to his desk after lunch, he found that the afternoon offered new challenges. She seemed to be testing him in ways that went beyond simple pranks. She asked questions that required careful thought, suggested solutions that prompted reconsideration of his approach, and engaged him in conversation that revealed both humor and insight. He noticed a subtle change in himself. He was responding differently, more openly, more engaged than before. The dynamic was shifting. Moving from irritation toward a strange form of connection, he remembered earlier weeks, the first days when her energy had felt overwhelming. Now he saw layers beneath the surface. She was not only playful, but observant, intelligent, capable of noticing nuances in behavior and response. He felt a mix of admiration and confusion. He was no longer just trying to maintain focus. He was learning to navigate an unpredictable environment, to anticipate, to react, and to engage. And in the process, he felt unexpectedly alive. A technical problem arose mid-afternoon. A document he had relied on was missing, and he couldn't proceed without it. Frustration began to rise, but before he could despair, she appeared. Without any overt dramatics, she suggested a solution. Simple adjustment that allowed him to recover the missing document. He was surprised both at her insight and at the ease with which she had resolved the issue. It was a reminder that her presence, though often chaotic, carried moments of clarity and assistance he hadn't fully appreciated. The rest of the afternoon continued in a similar rhythm, with subtle pushes and pulls between focus and distraction. He found himself observing her more than he intended, noticing the way she moved, the cadence of her voice, the expressions that passed fleetingly across her face. He realized that these observations were no longer incidental. They had begun to occupy space in his mind that he hadn't expected to fill. There was a growing awareness, a recognition of her influence on both his work and his thoughts. As the workday drew to a close, the office quieted, but she remained, moving through the space with casual grace. He observed her, noticing the small gestures, the interactions with colleagues, the energy she carried. It struck him how much attention he paid to her, how aware he had become of her presence. It was no longer just annoyance. It was anticipation, curiosity, attention that he couldn't ignore. He packed his belongings, feeling the weight of the day, both mentally and emotionally. He noticed little traces of her presence left behind, notes, small adjustments, subtle reminders that she had been there. Each trace prompted a reaction within him, a mix of frustration, curiosity, and a reluctant admiration. She had impacted his day in ways that went beyond mere disruption. She had shaped it, influenced it, and engaged him in a way that left him both exhausted and exhilarated. Walking to his car, reflected on how much his attention had been captured. Every interaction, every movement, every word from her had left an impression. He realized that the unpredictability he had once resisted was now something he found compelling. The day had not gone as planned, yet it had felt alive, vibrant, and emotionally engaging. He recognized that he was no longer simply responding. He was participating, anticipating, and even enjoying the challenge of the dynamic she created. Driving home, he replayed moments from the day in his mind. He remembered the subtle pranks, the gestures of insight, the moments when she had unexpectedly helped. He acknowledged to himself that these interactions had affected him more than he would have anticipated. The way she moved through his thoughts, the way her energy had shaped his reactions, left him aware of a growing emotional engagement he couldn't yet define. By evening, he felt mentally drained but emotionally stirred. He prepared a simple dinner, attempting to focus on routine tasks, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the office and to her. He considered the patterns, the gestures, the moments of unexpected connection. He recognized that her influence extended beyond the office, shaping his perceptions, his mood, and his reflections. It was an engagement that demanded attention and emotional investment. Sitting quietly after dinner, he reflected on the progression of their interactions. She had begun as a source of irritation, a force that disrupted his calm. Over time, that force had become a presence he could not ignore. A complex blend of challenge, amusement, and subtle connection. He realized that he had begun to anticipate her actions, to consider her perspective, and to appreciate the depth beneath the playful chaos. It was a new awareness, both unsettling and intriguing. As night settled, he prepared for bed, reviewing the day in his mind. He acknowledged, without fully understanding, that something had shifted. The dynamic between them was no longer simple disruption. It had evolved into something more nuanced, more engaging, and more personally impactful. He felt anticipation, curiosity, and a subtle sense of excitement for what tomorrow might bring. Despite the exhaustion, he recognized that the day had been alive, rich with interactions that challenged him, engaged him, and left him aware of feelings he was only beginning to comprehend. Lying in bed, he realized that he was thinking about her more than he wanted to admit. The teasing, the pranks, the helpful gestures, they all lingered in his mind. He understood that her presence had grown beyond mere distraction. It had become an emotional force, shaping his thoughts and reactions. And though he resisted the idea, he knew that he was beginning to care, to anticipate, and to feel in ways that were both unfamiliar and compelling. Tomorrow would bring more, and he found himself quietly looking forward to it, unsure why, but undeniably aware that she had begun to change the rhythm of his life. The morning began with a quiet anticipation he couldn't quite name. He arrived at the office, carrying his usual cup of coffee and settling into his desk with practiced calm. Yet something felt different. Perhaps it was the soft light streaming through the windows, or the faint hum of the office, or the awareness that today could change everything. He tried to focus on the reports and emails before him, but his mind kept wandering to her. To the way she had shifted his days in ways he hadn't expected. She appeared not long after he began. Leaning casually against his cubicle wall, her eyes held that familiar spark of mischief. But there was something new, a softness that he hadn't noticed before. She smiled, and for the first time, he felt a flutter of anticipation rather than irritation. He tried to maintain his focus on his work, but the pull of her presence was undeniable. Throughout the morning, their usual dynamic played out, but with subtle differences. The playful interruptions, the small pranks, the witty notes, all of it was there. But now they carried a new energy. There were moments of genuine connection, where her words and actions seemed to reach him in ways that went beyond the teasing. He found himself responding differently with openness and curiosity instead of irritation. He was aware of a shift in the air, a tension that was no longer solely playful, it was meaningful. By midday, the office felt charged with a quiet energy. She had orchestrated small gestures that seemed carefully timed, a sticky note on his desk with a kind message, a pen placed precisely where he needed it, a comment that made him laugh genuinely. He noticed the subtle care behind her actions, the way she observed him, and for the first time, he allowed himself to see her not just as a source of chaos, but as someone who understood him in small, meaningful ways. During lunch, he found himself unable to eat quietly. He replayed the morning, the little interactions, the moments when she had helped, and the brief glances that had made his heart beat a little faster. He realized that he had begun to care, to notice the depth behind the energy she had displayed all along. It was confusing and exciting, a mixture of nervous anticipation and growing admiration. He had resisted these feelings for so long, but now they were undeniable. Back at his desk after lunch, he noticed the way she interacted with others. She was playful, witty, and kind, drawing attention without needing it. He observed quietly, realizing that her energy was not just for him, it was part of her nature. Yet she had a way of making him feel uniquely noticed, uniquely engaged. He felt a warmth that surprised him, a connection that went beyond the daily pranks and distractions. The afternoon brought a moment that would change everything. He had been reviewing a particularly tricky report, struggling to make sense of the numbers, when she appeared at his side. She leaned over, pointing to a small detail he had overlooked. Her fingers brushed lightly against his papers, and he felt a jolt of awareness. He looked up at her, their eyes meeting, and for a long moment there was silence. The world seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the two of them and a shared, unspoken understanding. Then, without warning, she leaned closer and kissed him. It was brief, unexpected, yet it carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. He froze initially, caught between surprise and a sudden rush of emotion. She pulled back slightly, searching his eyes for a reaction. He realized that all the days of playful chaos, the pranks, the teasing, the subtle gestures of care, had led to this moment. It was as if every interaction had built toward something neither of them had anticipated, but both had silently acknowledged. The office seemed to fade into the background. Colleagues walked by, phones rang, and the hum of work continued, but he was aware of none of it. All that mattered was the connection, the unexpected intimacy, the acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing quietly beneath the surface. He felt a mix of relief, joy, and wonder. The barriers he had maintained, the walls of caution and focus, had been gently broken by her presence and her boldness. They stepped back, slightly breathless, and exchanged words that were soft but filled with meaning. There was laughter, nervous smiles, and an ease that came from finally acknowledging something that had been building for weeks. He realized that the frustration, the irritation, the playful chaos had been part of a larger rhythm, one that had led to understanding, connection, and emotional intimacy. The remainder of the day was spent in a new awareness. They interacted with the office as usual, but there was a subtle shift, a lightness in their exchanges, a warmth that had not been present before. Colleagues noticed a change too, seeing the tension replaced with a quiet camaraderie, an unspoken acknowledgement that something significant had occurred. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't expected, a sense that the unpredictable moments, the playful disruptions, and the small gestures of attention had all been part of a journey to this point. As the workday ended, he packed his things with a sense of contentment. The notes she had left behind, the small adjustments she had made, the subtle care in her interactions, all of it had contributed to a profound change in his perspective. Walking to his car, he reflected on how much his feelings had shifted, how someone who had once driven him crazy had now become a source of warmth, anticipation, and emotional engagement. He realized that human connections were unpredictable, that patience and openness could lead to moments of unexpected joy, and that vulnerability could be rewarding. Driving home, he felt a quiet excitement about the days to come. He thought about their shared glances, the brief kiss, the acknowledgement of feelings, and he understood that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges, laughter, teasing, and unexpected moments. But he was ready to embrace them, to participate fully, and to allow himself to experience life more openly. At home, he reflected on the journey. The playful chaos that had once frustrated him had revealed layers of personality, depth, and kindness that he had not recognized. The moments of connection, the gestures of care, the unexpected kiss, all of it had created a bond that felt genuine, human, and meaningful. He felt gratitude for the unpredictability that had led him to notice, to engage, and to care. That night, as he prepared for sleep, he allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he had resisted for so long. He cared for her, was drawn to her, and was curious about the future they could share. He realized that life's most meaningful moments often came in unexpected forms, through challenges, laughter, and moments of connection that revealed the beauty of human interaction lying in bed. He thought about the office, the week, the shared glances, and the small gestures that had led to the kiss. He smiled quietly, understanding that the playful chaos had transformed into something much deeper. It had changed him, opened him to vulnerability, and allowed him to feel in ways he hadn't anticipated. He was ready for the next day, for more laughter, more surprises, and for the unfolding story of connection that had begun with simple human interactions. And so, the chapter of their shared days closed with quiet contentment. What had begun as irritation, playful chaos, and subtle challenge had blossomed into understanding, connection, and the tender acknowledgement of feelings. He drifted into sleep with a sense of peace, curiosity, and anticipation, knowing that the journey of human connection, full of unexpected moments and subtle gestures, had brought him to a place of genuine joy and possibility.